Okay, let's talk a little bit about antitrust. We've already given you a little bit of introduction. We talked about 1890 and the robber barons, and so the first step is to define monopoly and to say you can't monopolize. One of the outcomes of the Sherman Act is we break up the oil industry, break up Standard Oil of Ohio. We divide it into, I think, 7 companies, and for many, many years, most of my lifetime, I knew who those companies were. There was Chevron and Texaco and Exxon and Mobil and Standard Oil were all those years from the 1890s when they were broken up to about the 1990s, so about 100 years. Rockefeller's main company. Well, ExxonMobil was created in 1996 or 98, and that's when we had this big batch of oil company mergers, which, in my opinion, really kind of violate the spirit of the Sherman Act. But in any event, we didn't really accomplish what we wanted to accomplish with the Sherman Act. So we fast forward into the early 1910s, and 1912, 1914, we passed the Clayton Act, and we also have the Federal Trade Commission. We start being more like we are today in terms of creating regulation to try and control business. We later passed the Robinson-Patman Price Discrimination Act because we're still having issues with some buddies get a better deal than other people who are similarly situated. Again, we want to emphasize in terms of price discrimination that you are allowed to discriminate on the basis of price if there is an economic reason to discriminate. So the best example of this is, quantity is the best example of this, is I had a friend of mine who had a family department store. And he told me he knew it was time to close the family department store. And very few of the items he sold were ever sold at Walmart and vice versa. But he said there was one item that he knew that he sold that Walmart also sold. He said he walks into Walmart, the item is for sale for less, the retail price of the item at Walmart was less than his wholesale price. And he said, I knew it was time to close my store. And you say, well, gee, that sounds like a violation of Robinson-Patman. The trouble is that a little family department store buys like a case of something, or a pretty big case, or maybe a batch of cases. Walmart buys a container of stuff in China, handles the transportation. Once it gets here, they use their own trucking system to distribute. Very, very difficult for small businesses to meet that. Now, a lot of people said Walmart is an attempted monopolizer because it comes into communities and it undersells. And then once they drive all little guys out of business, they're going to raise the prices. There's 2 problems with that. One of them is a lot of small businesses are still here. Why? Why is my corner hardware store right around the corner from my Heights property? Why are they still there? And doing great
product, and they actually know what you're talking about.
I always go there to get keys. And I walk in, it's next to the cashier, and I say, I need keys. Peter, come here. The guy comes up, makes keys for me. Every key works that I've had made at that hardware store. Every single key.
Bearings, by any chance?
No. It's C&D Hardware up in the Heights.
Oh.
Yeah, it's True Value Hardware up in the Heights. Service. What a novel idea. Maybe we don't have to compete on price. And I pay 50 cents a key more. But it's worth it because I don't waste a lot of time tromping through the store. I don't waste a lot of time looking for the person to run the key machine at the Lowe's or the Home Depot. Nothing about Lowe's and Home Depot. It's just, what do you need done? And if you ever need a couple screws or little fasteners, do you want to hunt through Home Depot, or are you going to walk into the little hardware store and say, could I please have 3 of these? And it's amazing. They go get 3 of these for 27 cents and they hand them to you. It's like, gosh, amazing. Yeah. So the point is that service is, there's a competition realm there that's available. And the other thing is that Walmart didn't raise the prices when other stores went out of business because their model is based on being a low price provider. So they really have trouble moving off that. Now, I think over time that they're going to be raising prices because it's such a thing of being too cheap. But where I think is going to drive that is a cost basis, because many of you may be aware that Walmart announced right about a year ago now that they're going to raise their minimum salaries to $9 or $10, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but remember the national minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. The national minimum wage is still $7.25, and likely to be there for quite a while. And so it is a situation where they are voluntarily setting their minimum salaries higher. I think that's going to be reflected in slightly higher costs over time, but you know, that's life in the fast. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, so keep in mind what the different pieces do. And we don't talk a lot about this. I'm very much into the nuts and bolts of what we do here in our business law class. So whether it's the traditional school or the Chicago school, I don't really care. It's about antitrust. Now, the distinction for us is I'm more in the traditional school. I like to see lots of small businesses. I don't like to see I'm specifically, in fact, it's in my book, we specifically criticize the ExxonMobil merger as totally unnecessary and against the philosophy behind the Sherman Act of encouraging multiple small businesses, and certainly ExxonMobil, the number one and the number two largest oil companies in the world, certainly were able to stand on their own. This was not an emergency merger of a company that was in trouble, like during the big recession we had when Countrywide was brought up and pushed over to VOA. That's a little bit different. You know, we can try to justify that, but ExxonMobil, nobody over there was missing a meal. 14,000 jobs eliminated in that merger. 14,000 jobs. And we're not talking Walmart jobs or Postal Service jobs. We're talking the good jobs, like we all like to have here in Houston. And I came out of the old patch. I worked for Shell out of law school, so I know what that looks like.
And now you're in academia.
I'm badly paid in academia, absolutely. So, keep in mind that antitrust enforcement is civil and criminal, depending on it. One of the disturbing trends, and actually even The Economist, which is kind of a left-leaning publication, has said that it's disturbing when you have things that are traditionally civil in nature and you start doing a lot of criminal enforcement. So it may help to get people's attention, but you're using a lot of resources of the government, and would it be better to not impute criminal intent unless the person's really a criminal, like Madoff apparently is, and people like that. So pretty interesting stuff. But even The Economist says, gee, this is a concern. We shouldn't be trying to criminalize normal civil activity unless it's really criminal. And a lot of this stuff's about money, which in itself is not necessarily criminal action. But you can't go to jail for this, for attempted monopolization. One of the things we want to emphasize is how you want to get there. You can sue if you're an industry and you've been hurt by antitrust actions. You can go to court on your own, and occasionally that's done, usually again on broader industry. Monopolization is the effort. Most of you are familiar with the famous game board, Monopoly, and the trademark and the little metal pieces and move around the board and all that. So that was produced in the initially, I think around 1930, when again a lot of people were blaming the Great Depression on concentration in industry, and this is after Sherman, Clayton, and the FTC. We're all in effect by 1929. We still have the Great Depression. And anyway, game Monopoly is born, and also played at McDonald's and at Randall's supermarkets for some reason. And anyway, but you don't have to have 100% of the market. You just have to have a pretty good chunk or be making a special effort to gain a particular chunk of the market. Part of this is defining the market. Now, I will tell you how the oil companies got the courts to sign off on the ExxonMobil merger. They said the relevant market was the oil market. So I know I always drive to Mexico to buy my gasoline. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying this at all. But anyway, the question is relevant market. Is the relevant market in the United States? Is the relevant market in the city of Houston? Is the relevant market in North Houston? You know, and so those are the kind of issues that we get into here when we talk about relevant market. How about services? Are we competing or are we comparing apples to apples? One of the things that came out of this is there were at least one refinery had to be divested. I think it was the one in Chalmette, Louisiana, where I used to work. And I think that's one Exxon. I think, no, I had actually worked for Tenneco. Tenneco owned Chalmette Refinery, and then later when Tenneco closed, I think Mobil ended up with Chalmette, and then in the merger, because Exxon had a big refinery in Baton Rouge, I think they Mobil divest. Well, they didn't shut down. I think Valero ended up owning it. The other thing that's happening is their gas retailing. A lot of stations will cross street from each other, busy intersections. Basically, the big oil companies have really gotten out of retailing. So when you see that Shell sign, that's a license. It's not even a franchise, it's a license. Yes, here we're going to provide you gasoline, you get to use the Shell sign, and you know, we get a few cents extra a gallon for gasoline because you got a Shell sign up there. But yeah, it's a very different industry than it was 40 or 50 years ago. Pretty interesting.
Why are cable companies not deemed monopolies?
Good question. Why are cable companies not deemed monopolies? Because we have something called natural monopolies. And I was going to talk about that next, so I will now. What happened is when things had to be lines under the street, it got real complicated. We had the Edison Electric Company, and we had the Bell Telephone Company and stuff like that. And in the early days, we were running multiple phone lines through big cities like Philadelphia and New York. So the decision was made, how about if we have one phone company and one electric company? And they authorized a monopoly. Those are regulated monopolies. Today, what's interesting, of course, is with phone service actually was determined no longer needed to be a natural monopoly, didn't need the protection because we have other ways of running, you know, cabling and wires and stuff like that. So each industry, it makes a difference, but I think it's determined with regard to cable, Comcast, and you know that there's been a lot of resistance. Some of the cable companies have tried to combine, and it's very inconsistent. The Department of Justice, DOJ, will step in and say, no, this merger isn't okay, but yeah, we'll let this merger happen. So it depends on where you are geographically and the pieces that mix together. But remember that you've got, in the Houston market, you have AT&T competes head-on with almost the same services with Comcast, plus you have DirecTV and who's the other satellite provider? Dish. So you got two satellite providers and you've got two traditional cable or similar cable providers. So I think
that would be considered interchangeable, cable and satellite?
Yeah, except that where I think the action really is internet, and I'm hoping we're going to see some new. Now, I think they're trying to say now that they can actually transmit internet signal with the satellite. And you could have an in-house network tied to your satellite, and then the satellite will send the internet signal. But again, that's not nearly as reliable as you know. In our office, we use Ethernet cable. We do not use it. We provide Wi-Fi. But most of us run on hardwired internet connections, which are more secure and more reliable. So it depends on how we do things. But anyway, there is some competition in there now. If AT&T tried to buy Comcast, or Comcast tried to buy AT&T in this market, I predict the DOJ would be down on that in a heartbeat.
AT&T actually just bought Dish.
Yes. Yeah. And partially because they weren't viewed as competitors, and it competes with the other satellite network. So there's still some interchange there. So it's some pretty interesting stuff. Again, I don't have to defend a lot of this because I'm not really thrilled with it. Well, I don't think we're doing a very good job. I don't think the Department of Justice is protecting. And again, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I'd like to see more small businesses and less incredibly large consolidations. And all of us in this room have a stake in it because it also reduces the number of white-collar jobs, which people in an MBA program, or you're in a program designed to put you in managerial or white-collar positions. These type of consolidations, you go from one VP of human resources in each company to one for the two companies, and so on down the line. 14,000 people lose their jobs in one shot with ExxonMobil merger. So that's what we're talking about. So I think that hopefully there's going to be some balance coming in the future. A lot of this stuff ebbs and flows, and I think hopefully we're heading into a situation where it's not going to go the same way. I want to point out to you a couple words here. Concerted action. This is where businesses work together to achieve monopoly. This is what we dealt with during the robber baron era because they all hung out together. They literally socialized together. They did business together, and they could work in concert to freeze out companies that were trying to compete with them. So that's a significant issue. Two key terms here in the second bullet. Per se, that means you actually are monopolizing. You set out to monopolize. Sometimes we can find evidence, in email streams, statements among people, live testimony that, the intent is to drive AT&T out of business, or, somebody at Walmart saying our intent is to drive Target out of business, or whatever. The smoking gun, as we call it. That's per se. Think about the smoking gun. Now, because of the obvious, there are not a lot of per se cases out there. Okay, that's the obvious part. Most people are a little smarter than that. So virtually all the cases are under rule of reason. So here's the problem. ExxonMobil under a rule of reason. That's how it was determined. Oh, this is reasonable. Well, we'll just define the relevant market as the world, in which case each one of them only has like 5% of the world market. Gee, they're only little guys. I think we will. Who are they? The 1 and 2 largest oil companies. Yeah, I mean, to me, this ain't reason. This is unreasonable. I'm sorry.
Was it determined that they were like in different markets, or?
No, they were determined to be in the same markets. That's why they had to divest some of their retail stores, and why they had to divest at least, I think, more than one refinery, but certainly the one in Shellnut was one of the ones that got dumped. But that's the victim of the rule of reason. And I actually have two different things going on when we criticize that. I have a journal article that is going to be published in the next month or two, where we talk about rule of reason with regard to sports stadiums, and we actually encourage monopoly prosecution of the sports leagues, baseball, football, basketball, because they deliberately monopolize, and they've been treated as exempt from monopolization rules. And what it does is it puts them in a position to blackmail cities into building stadiums for them. And it's, by the way, public vote on election day in San Diego, they voted against being blackmailed into building a stadium down there. Kind of interesting. Los Angeles, by the way, has a 4-sport stadium, privately financed, $2 billion, privately financed. $2 billion, privately financed. Minnesota, $1 billion stadium, half of the money is public money. Half of the money, $500 million from your tax dollars there in Minnesota. Really a shame. So anyway, those are the kind of things we cover. So we're going to go after rule of reason there also. So anyway, but that's why I'm critical of it, because it's too squishy. It's not getting the job done for people. Now keep in mind, one of the things we talk about in looking at markets is horizontal versus vertical. It's pretty straightforward. Horizontal, gas stations across the street from each other. You're looking at the retailing industry. Vertical is integration. And of course, the oil companies are very vertical. They own the land, the oil, the refinery, the pipelines, the gas stations. They own the whole thing, of course. And as I mentioned, they've started divesting the gas stations. Not because of the reasons you might think, not because of antitrust. It's because they're a pain and they're not that profitable. So what the big oil companies have decided to do is to focus on what we call upstream. I know it's down but it's upstream in the definition in the oil industry, and to really be upstream producers down to the first part of the downstream, which is near retail, but allowing the retail to go separately. Believe it or not, a relatively venial reason for doing that. When I was in the oil companies, what happened is we set up the retail stores in a separate corporation so that we could have different benefits, because under the federal rules, benefits cannot be discriminatory. You have to give all your employees the same benefit access, with some exceptions for executives and stuff. Well, lo and behold, they just set up a separate company. Well, was it separately owned? No, it was 100% owned by the corporation. So it was a technical violation. So what happened is, I don't know if anybody got caught, but the oil companies figured out, well, we can't give our big Cadillac benefit plans with pensions and all that, we can never afford to give that to minimum wage workers in gas stations. So it's a pretty hard-edged analysis, but so by divesting the last rung, the gas stations themselves, we don't have to fool with the problem, so we don't have to pay those benefits. So it's better to give up the limited additional profit at the pump, because we don't have to provide benefits to those people, and it's a pain in the butt to do management at that level. I have a lot of experience. I used to be labor counsel for about 500 convenience stores, and so I can tell you it's a very high volume paying business. I mean, lots and lots of stuff going on. So very interesting business. I'm not doing any convenience stores right now, by the way. Tying arrangements are illegal. The most famous case of this is IBM got hammered many years ago when they were the big dogs in computers, and you talk to the computer not with a mouse and not with a keyboard, but with data cards. So you run the cards through and punch them, feed them into the computer. So realistically, IBM said, if you're using an IBM computer, you need to buy the cards from us. A court said that was an illegal tying arrangement. Interesting. So. Exclusive dealing, again, doesn't this sound a little bit like monopolization? It's like, okay, we're only going to deal with our friends, the Carnegies over here and the Vanderbilts, and if you're John Jones, you're just out of luck. Your name doesn't end in Carnegie or Vanderbilt. So it's reminiscent of what happened during the Robert Barron era, and so exclusive dealing agreements are very much frowned upon. You have to have a real good reason in order to be in that situation.
Isn't Microsoft kind of doing the same with IBM? Like you have to buy, it's a tie-in arrangement? Good
question. Microsoft and IBM's arrangement, it's voluntary. IBM can use anybody they want, and I can tell you Microsoft gets under the microscope all the time because they're so incredibly dominant, and that gets very close to a modern natural monopoly, because what happens is, I go back, I mean, I remember I had my first computer made for me in 1986 when I was getting ready to, have my own business. And, you went and bought a little black and white monitor, and you talked to your computer with floppies, and there was no mouse, and you used your function keys. So I go back to the era, and I have learned in my early lifetime with computers 4 different word processing programs. Most of them no longer exist today at all, but it was interesting because, and one of them actually was the IBM word processing program, one of the ones I learned. To have, in Lotus 123 was the spreadsheet we used, and I'm trying to think, we didn't have PowerPoint, it hadn't been invented yet, and so we had spreadsheets, and we had that, and about the only company that's really survived against them is Apple as a separate operation, and they're, talking about tying is, you can't have an Apple without an Apple operating system, the hardware won't work without their software, and it's a very unique operation. But if you really want a difference, you can use Linux, which is free, open source operating system. but I can't because I don't have enough time in the day to, to learn how to do all this stuff. I just want to go in and use it. And so for me and millions and millions and millions of other business people, having a set of software that talks to itself, because I can open Excel, PowerPoint, Access, and Word. And I'm no fan of Microsoft. I don't like giant companies telling me what to do and dominating the market, but they don't charge $1,000 for their program. It's like, I guess it adds about $60 or $80 to the cost of a computer to have the Microsoft, whatever the current system is, 10 or whatever. And so, again, the Department of Justice is on top of them, but as you know from another chapter we talked about, is that you have to be concerned about international. So Microsoft passes US, gets banged for $500 million in the European Union. So Microsoft's dealing with that now. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so there's a very specific situation. So I can't necessarily defend it, except to say that Microsoft was created by IBM in this way. When they didn't think that personal computers were going to be that big a deal. IBM pioneered personal computers as kind of a toy idea, sideline. So when they came out with it, they didn't want to put a lot of resources into an operating system. So they hired a college dropout, Bill Gates, and a couple of his buddies, I don't know if they're all college dropouts, to design the DOS, what became DOS, disk operating system. What's interesting about that is IBM could very easily have made it work for hire and said, well, we're hiring you to create this, so it's ours. They didn't. They made it a contract operation, and they allowed Gates and his buddies to retain ownership and created a company far larger today than IBM. But that, you want to talk about one of the biggest business misses in history. And if you ever wrote a book about when did you really miss something, that's got to be in the first chapter if you think about it. But that's what happened, is that the IBM created Microsoft by not bringing it in-house, by making a contract operation, and to give them the incentive to keep going. They said, well, anytime we make a PC, we're going to buy your DOS, and it was probably $10 a unit or something back then in the mid-1980s. And who knew they were going to sell millions and millions of PCs? The IBM people were not that smart. They didn't realize that we all wanted a computer on our desk. We didn't want some giant room-sized piece of hardware down the hall connected by wires. That we really did want one on our desk. And but that's what happened. That's how it came about. And because of the way it came about, even though the Department of Justice runs after Microsoft a lot, it's relatively hard to argue with the fact that consumers do choose, and they can choose Apple, and they can choose Linux. So it's a very tentative deal. And I'm not saying that at some point in the future there wouldn't be some prosecution, and where you might see division is similar to what Hewlett-Packard did, where they separated equipment and software. The Hewlett-Packard has separated its operations. So you might see that in the future. It may be prompted by government pressure.
Gateway, they already did that to Microsoft once.
Yeah. So lots of different things going on out there. We talk about mergers. The bigger merger is the horizontal merger. Conglomerate mergers generally pass without a lot of review. What's interesting about that, of course, is the age of the conglomerate is pretty much gone. I was with Tenneco, one of the last of the big conglomerates. ITT is basically gone in that sense. And so a lot of companies that had the ability to be conglomerates have actually backed off, like General Motors. Remember, used to have a big financial division and lots of other things going on, and then they divested a lot of stuff. And the mantra today seems to be to, just really focus on your key competencies. I'm very mixed about that. I think that as long as something makes money and you're able to run it competently, I don't think it makes a lot of difference whether it's an oil company or a trucking company, as long as you have competent people working for it. But again, it's not my call to make. I'm not going to be building a conglomerate tomorrow, at least not that anybody's recruited me to do. We talked about price discrimination already. We talked about overseas. And it has to have, if you're going to enforce U.S. antitrust laws overseas, you're going to need to have some tie to the U.S. You can't just say, oh, we're worried about it, it's going to come over here. However, again, keep in mind the balancing act is the folks overseas can go after them too. So, and that's kind of the balancing act again on what we see in the Microsoft.